Thank you. So, hello everyone. My name is Sandra Simovic, and I am the Israeli General Consul to South Germany. I'm very happy to be here with you and with this remarkable panelists here. And there are all the economy experts. I'm a diplomat. So I will try to give a short overview of what is so special about the Israeli ecosystem, what makes it the startup nation that is so well known for today. The precondition, I think, that made Israel what it is, what is interesting about it is they are both economical, but not, at least important, also psychological and society. They have to do with our society. And this is what made Israel today the country with the highest density of startups worldwide. I would say around 1 to 1,400 people. Each year, between 1,100 and 1,400 new startups join the already existing one. Therefore, it remains a world leader in the export of technology, and the high-tech exports account for a total of 70%. It is maybe therefore not very surprising that many of the world leaders' companies have opened investment centers or R&D excellence centers in Israel, such as Microsoft, Motorola, Siemens, Deutsche Telekom, and many, many others. So, what's so unique about Israel? First of all, the fact that it's a country that is made of immigrants. It's a country that is made of more than 90 different origin countries. People who came from really all over the world, different mentalities, from Africa, from America, Asia, Europe, the former Soviet Union. And what is so unique about immigrants is the fact that they don't have this fear to leave things behind and start anew. When you have to leave behind you everything that you know and start a new life, then your fear of failure, of starting something new, it's much lower. I think it's one important criteria that made this Israel startup culture what it is. It turned Israel into a mosaic of different religions and ethnicity, and you can see it everywhere. You can see it in our parliament, in the university, in our culture, and also in the economy that was also enriched by this diverse influence. The Arab population, which is 20% of the Israeli population, is also part of the society, and of course, its culture is also has also a meaningful weight. Israel's ability to respond very promptly, this lack of fear of starting anew or taking risks, which is very important when you have to do with startups, because I think around 80% of the startups fail in the first year. So this lack of fear that many Israelis have is something that also I think is true for the government that is also willing to be innovative and willing to take risks. Since the late 1980s, the Israeli government has actively created preconditions to unleash this potential of the private sector and pave the way for private capital. Government support and this encouragement to take risks and experiment with new ideas played a crucial role in this innovative spirit. The Israeli government founded the Technological Incubator Program in the early 1990s. Today, there are over such 25 incubators across the country, all privatized. The incubator often government funding up to 85% of the early project costs for 2 years. In addition, the Israeli Innovation Authority offers also a variety of funding programs with an annual budget of around $400 million. Another thing that has to do with Israeli society is the lack of hierarchy. It's a very flat hierarchy society, and to many, if not all of you who met Israelis, noticed this chutzpah, or this, positive, I would say, attitude towards the other, which enables even young people who don't have necessarily the official educational or vocational background to try and open their own startups just because they believe in a good idea. In this respect, it reflects, again, the Israeli society of giving equal opportunities and pluralism. And if you go back to the Arab-Israeli startup as an example, the Israeli government has dedicated special resources to help create a positive growth environment for the young Arab population. The Israeli Ministry of Economy and the tech industry launched a first incubator for technology startups that a key driver, thank you very much, behind this development are tech NGOs, like Zeugen, that was founded in 2008 by Jewish and Arab tech professionals and economists. What is special about this program is that it uses the know-how and the networks that Israeli military veterans have in order to bring together Arab-Israeli entrepreneurs at an early stage with those veterans of elite units of the Israeli army, and together to bring forward their ideas. If we speak about the Israeli army, this is also a major element in this startup nation. I think many of you heard maybe about those elite technological units, 8-100, for example. It produces those elite units that produce veterans which later become entrepreneurs. They gain technical skills. And I would say that around 70% of the successful Israeli startups are run by such graduates of elite unit. During the army, beside those important technological skills, you also gain soft skills, such as teamwork and devotion to a mission. You receive all those important elements, all those ingredients, and then you make a good use of them in your civil life. Therefore, many startups started as from military use and developed to civilian use later on. What Israel, I think, would like very much to do is to share the know-how that we have and the experience with our neighbors. And we would really like to put much more resources, instead of devoting them to fighting terrorism and security issues, to allocate much more to also having a good neighborly cooperation relations with our neighbors. Unfortunately, this is not the case yet, because peace is not in our hands alone, and it still remains a difficult situation. So it is a difficult situation, but surprisingly enough, it also has an advantage when it comes to startups. And why? Because of this complicated situation of Israel, we are not geographically an island, but geopolitically we are one. Therefore, the Israeli companies and startups need to be innovative enough in order to outreach for companies outside Israel, across the sea. They have to be particularly creative and forward-looking. And a good example is what is happening between the economical relations between Israel and Germany. They are a very good example. I always like to say that Germany and Israel complement each other, because Israel is, like I said, they have this chutzpah. We are small, but we always think that we can achieve much more than we are. Actually, we punch much above our weight. And we rush into things, and we are very creative. Like I said, a lot due to the circumstances. In Germany, they are very well structured, well established. They are doing very well. But together, I think with this combination between the Israeli and the German advantages creates really a wonderful result. And this is what we are trying to do here at the consulate, to bring the medium-sized, the Mittelstand companies, the German ones, together with Israeli startups, and to put this success and innovation together. It can bring only wonderful ideas. So I want to wish you all a very interesting discussion. I guess it will be also a discussion. And thank you for coming here.
Thank you very much, Sandra. I think you touched already quite a few aspects that we will discuss in more detail. The title of this panel today is Developing Israel's Economy, Developing the Ecosystem for Innovation by Setting the Preconditions. I don't know how you feel about that and what your expectations are, but when I read this title first, I thought, well, something's missing. In terms of, innovation is a major factor, of course, with regard to technology, with regard to ecosystem, but as such, it doesn't have any value. In other words, technical innovation does not lead anywhere without with the right people making proper use out of such technology. And so when preparing this panel, it's also referred to as Startup Nation, this panel. I looked at the book of the same title, You Know It All, by Dan Senior and Saul Singer. And right in the beginning, the author's note, it says, this is a book about innovation and entrepreneurship and how one small country, Israel, came to embody both. This is not a book about technology, even though we feature many high-tech companies. While we are fascinated by technology and its impact on the modern age, our focus is on the ecosystem that generates radically new business ideas. Changing only very few words, I believe this can be a precise summary of the subject matter of this afternoon's panel. And I'm very happy to discuss these issues with Israel Maimon, President and CEO of Israel Bonds. On this occasion, thank you very much for making this possible. I see also Friedrich Naumann Stiftung has contributed, so also thank you to Friedrich Naumann Stiftung, of course. With us is also Bettina Stark-Watzinger to my left. Inter alia, Bettina is Secretary General of the FDP in Hesse, and she is the chairwoman of the Federal Finance Committee, whatever the German word is. Finally, and not the least, I have with me on the panel Shai Babat, Managing Director of the Israeli Ministry of Finance. So, let's go into the details. We all know today Israel is known as the Startup Nation, and Sandra, you also just summarized how it all started, but let's have a bit more closer look at when it all started, how it all started, and what the general economic situation in Israel was like at that time. So Israel, maybe you can elaborate on that a bit in some more detail. You have to press this button so we can hear you all. Thank you.
Thank you, and good afternoon to everyone. Yes, it was not always the case with Israel. It's when we speak about startup nation, Israel is a startup nation. Now it seems very, very obvious that Israel is known as the startup nation and the innovation. But it wasn't always like that. And don't worry, it's not going to be a lesson of history, but you have to understand the background in order to really appreciate the achievement that was made or were made in the 70 years that Israel exists as a new-born state. When Israel was established in 1948, I don't know how many of you know, we had in Israel 600,000 people. This was the population in Israel. Most of them refugees. After the war of 48, the refugees came from the camps in Europe. But immediately after the establishment of Israel, the Jewish people from the Arab state were forced to leave their states and to move to where? Most of them came to Israel. So put aside the cost of the independence war, put aside, of course, the human loss. We lost something like 60,000 people in that war. 1% of the 10% of the population. Money with a state without any income, a state that is, you can say, geographically an island even, when you have this Arab state surrounding you, so you don't have any relations of commerce with your neighbors. So, yes, Israel had to deal at that time at the end of the 40s and the 50s and the 60s in building the infrastructure of Israel to absorb I believe, something like 2 million immigrants from the Arab world and from Europe that fled after the Shoah. And at that time, it was all the establishments, all the institutions were owned by the state, like any new state. It's not. It was not owned by private companies. So this was the situation back then. And when you have such a level of cost, you have to think where you're bringing funds in order to establish. So, of course, Ben-Gurion, the first prime minister, had to do many things, and he was really a true leader in that sense. But I will speak on one angle, and with that I will conclude the first question. But David Ben-Gurion, that was really a man with vision, understood that he cannot rely more and more and more on donations that will come from the Jewish world. And just to remind everyone, the Jewish world at that time, the only really Jewish community that flourished was in the United States. In Europe, they were after the Holocaust. And of course, in the Arab world, they were not so rich. And he knew that he cannot rely anymore on the donations. They gave a lot, by the way, to establish Israel before it was established. And he came with an idea of Israel bonds, meaning that he will not ask for donations from the Jewish world, but rather he will ask them to invest in Israel. Now, at that time, he could have gone to banking industry outside of Israel, but who will invest? An institution, a financial institution that purely asks itself about the return on the investment. Who is going to invest in Israel at that time that is surrounded by Arab world? No one gave Israel a future at that time. So there were no funds coming from the institutional world. He decided to form Israel bonds in order to receive investments from the Jewish people. It was very, very new. I read a book, only Ireland tried to do that. By the way, I read an article last week that Africa is trying now to issue bonds that the diaspora of African people that has money will invest in Africa. I think in Nigeria. But it's very, very unique. And the Jewish people at that time were ready to take the risk on their investment. However, Israel bonds became a very, very successful endeavor. And Israel bonds really set the platform for receiving funds to establish the infrastructure of Israel. So if you go to Israel now and you look on the physical infrastructure, 50s, 60s, and the 70s, it was really built by the foreign money that was given, dollar money, that was given or invested by the Jewish people back then. Through the years, it was shifted from physical infrastructure, and we will touch that maybe later on in the discussion. It was shifted from the physical infrastructure to investing in the human resource, which led, of course, later on to the land of innovation.
It was, I believe, in 2016, I was hosting a discussion panel, and we had with us the chief economist of a very prestigious German industry association. And in this preparation talk we had with this person, he said, "Oh yeah, Israel, it's about oranges. They sell oranges." So that was quite surprising, not only because he was the chief scientist, chief economist of this organization, but also because the statement was made in 2016. My question is, Israel, what was the reason to transform economy from, let's say, an economy with some focus at least on agricultural production towards high-tech?
Well, there are many reasons, but I would say the first one is that we spoke about David Ben-Gurion. The leaders at that time knew one thing. Put aside Israel surrounded by the Arab world, an island. Israel doesn't have any, at that time, any natural resource. We don't have oil. We didn't have gas, back then natural gas. We didn't have any natural resource. So we had to rely only either on hard work, small industry, or the brain. And thank God, we have some brain in the Jewish people. You know, when Sandra was speaking about why it's startup nation, what has the spirit of the startup nation, I remember the phrase that Shimon Peres, I'm sure all of you heard about him, Shimon Peres, the late president of Israel. He was really the assistant of David Ben-Gurion at the beginning of Israel. But when he was asked why Israel is such a startup nation and such an innovation place, he said, maybe it's connected to the Jewish mother. Why? So the Jewish mother is never satisfied. Is never satisfied. If the boy is bringing 97 in the grade, in the test, she's saying, why not 100? If he's bringing 100, couldn't you receive a bonus? Something. So this spirit of the mother came also to the young generation. But eventually, when you are trying to establish a real Western advanced country where you don't have any resource, natural resource, you have to direct your investments to somewhere else, which is the brain. And a lot of money, as was described by Sandra, I think you can criticize, and we criticize a lot of time the government. But in terms of government relations with private sector in developing the startup nation in Israel was amazing. The funds that was given to the chief scientist, the incubators, it was then called something else, but all of that really created the platform for the industry. Shai, my friend from the Ministry of Finance, he will of course mention that. Shai's role, by the way, in the government, he is really the engine behind Israel's the economic success of Israel in the last 4 years. 4 years. He's the engine that is working together with the Minister of Finance, Moshe Kahlon. But he will tell you about what we are doing in order to enable this innovation to come together. It's not coming without any assistance in putting the platform from the government. But what happened is that from that history lesson that I gave on the 40s, 50s, 60s, what happened is that the government decided to go and privatize many of the state-owned entities, open the market for competition. And at that time, we had a really great aliyah, immigrations coming from former Soviet Union. 1 million people came from former Soviet Union, many of them engineers that, again, we, together with all what happened in Israel and together with them, it brought a fresh brain to Israel. And as Sandra spoke, the development of technological solutions in the army, and you can speak about cyber, you can speak about satellites, and you can speak about many, many other developments, they started because Israel had to defend itself. So all of that in the 70s and 80s brought I would say the 90s that in one big boom, and together with the government, brought the platform that enabled where we are now.
Israel, one more question.
I'm only the one that is being asked? I'm kidding.
No, wait. In your view, what are the major fields of innovation when it comes to transformation from this more agricultural focused industry towards a high-tech industry? Was it like whatever there is, or was it some sort of a strategy, sort of a structure?
Listen, it started with if I recall, there were few founders of the startup industry or the industry, but now you can, if you will try to find one industry that is not covered, it will be amazing, because everything is covered today. I was 2 weeks ago, if you will allow me, I was 2 weeks ago in the Prime Minister's conference that was done together with the Paris Center for Innovation and Peace. It took place in Jerusalem 2 weeks ago. And to that conference came, to tiny Israel, the Vice President of China. You all heard about Alibaba. I'm sure that after the Black Friday you heard about Alibaba. But the founder of Alibaba, Jack Ma, came. The CEO of Google, former CEO of Google, Eric Schmidt, and some other tech giants. And they all came to praise the State of Israel for its success. And they came to learn not only about the technological solution, but what is exactly the platform that we are using, put aside the Israeli spirit and the chutzpah and those kind of things. But what are we doing together with the private sector in order to enable the achievement? If you let me, I want to quote, because we are very proud about it. So Jack Ma said, the Israeli people proved one thing: if you have brains and heart, anything is possible. And the Chinese vice president said, Israel is a renowned country of innovation. Now, at that conference, the Prime Minister showed a very nice slide. He showed a slide that in 2007, the 10 top companies, when it's based on market capitalization, the 10 top companies in the world, 4 of them had R&D centers in Israel. In 2017, 10 years later, the top 10, how many of them has an R&D center in Israel? All of them. All top 10 companies, and I can name them so you can get a sense of the industries that we're covering. Apple, Alphabet is part of Google, Microsoft, Amazon, Facebook, Tencent, Berkshire Hathaway, Alibaba Group, Johnson & Johnson, and JP Morgan Chase. So I think that Israel is covering and collaborating with many, many other parts of the world in developing all areas of industries.
Thank you, Israel. You just mentioned this word platform. I think we need to go in some more detail regarding that. So Shai, possibly you can explain a bit more. How do you see the roles of politics, science, and industry and their cooperation in developing the ecosystem for innovation?
You mean about the role of the government in it?
The interaction.
The interaction, okay. So first of all, thank you everybody for coming here today. I think that most people look at governments as an obstacle. And most of the times they're right, because the government usually have most of the bureaucracy and legislation that prevents from the free market, from the private sector to prevail. But I think the story about Israel is trying to find the ways in which we can intervene as less and push the innovation by whether it's funds, whether it's government assistance, wherever it's possible, and wherever it will give the greatest value. And we see it in 2 major fields. We see it in the ecosystem of the high-tech, and we see it in education when it comes to the IDF. And I think this is where the Israeli government has most of its influence. When it comes to the ecosystem, in Israel today, I think we are number one in investing in R&D per capita than any other country in the world. And most of it is government expenditure. When you look at the ecosystem that has prevailed through the IDF, is that because of the security situation and because we're one of the most likable countries in the world, we had to invent ourselves in a world of cyber attacks in cases in which today, I think, approximately 15 to 20% of global cyber investments are done in Israel. And we are 0.1% of the world population. That's 200 times our size. And as government, our role is to find, well, where do we actually pick up those fields in which we believe, first of all, we need it for ourselves, and second, where we can excel, and then push investments towards those fields, whether it's international investments or local investors to come in, and reduce regulation and reduce bureaucracy. Minister Kahlon and myself always tell our people, if it works, then you don't need to fix it. Just don't ruin it. Don't have the government coming in with new legislation and new regulation and new bureaucracy, which will make things much, much slower. The private sector usually has its own pace, and it runs very, very, very quickly. And the government is always in a place to try to catch up and to try to set up the regulation that will address competition and free market legislation and bureaucracy that is needed. And here, I think what's different about Israel is that we are looking very, very carefully where we should and where we shouldn't intervene.
I think cybersecurity is a very good example. I heard Giora Island lecturing on that issue, how the national Israeli cybersecurity strategy was built in terms of cooperation, collaboration, and mutual beneficiary effects between IDF, science, and industry. And I think Bettina will possibly talk about it a bit. Here in Germany, we have sort of reservations when it comes to creating knowledge, creating expertise in the public sector, finally for the benefit of the private sector. And so when I heard that about the cyber security strategy, it's most impressive. It's really very, very impressive. And it works, obviously, just what you referred to. It actually works.
By the way, I heard a figure that, again, I heard it from Prime Minister Netanyahu when he addressed the UN, not this year, last year, but he said 25% of total investment in the world in cybersecurity is in companies that are based in Israel. 25% of all investments around the world are channeled to Israel. It's unbelievable.
One key word that you mentioned, I think Israel, that was you, it was the chief scientist. And maybe, Shai, you can tell a bit more about his activities and purpose.
Well, the purpose of the chief scientist is exactly to try and locate all the fields in which the private sector can excel and in which we can, in Israel, contribute an added value, whether it's to the local market or to the international market. And what it does, it comes to companies, or it searches for companies with the initial stages, where you have an initial idea, and you need the investment, and you need someone to come and to support you and to pump some money in so you can come and from the innovative stage going to the developing stage. And there is where the chief scientists come in. We as government allocated a lot of funds in which we give through the budget to the chief scientist, and there are hundreds and dozens of hundreds of companies that and even individuals who approach the chief scientist every single year for various ideas. Some of those ideas people can consider as crazy. One of those ideas that was approached to the chief scientist a couple of years ago was the automated car, which means we don't need to drive our cars anymore. The car can do it for us. And a couple of years later, there's Mobileye, was purchased by Intel for $15 billion. And today everybody's talking about automated vehicles, so that the world can be in a place where we utilize our cars much more than we used to utilize them before, because once the car becomes automated, then we don't actually need to own a car. And think of it. That car can actually serve a number of households at the same time. And by the same way we have shared taxi services today by Uber, or we can actually have an automotive car that can do it for all of us. And if that will be the case, imagine what will that do to traffic jams, and how much time we will be sparing and spending less on roads and more either with our families as leisure or work time. And what will that have to world productivity, and what will that have? So when a person comes with a crazy idea like that, you know, we don't need drivers anymore, and that goes, I think, 10 years backwards, everybody looks at him, it's crazy. But then at the end of the day, and today that person is actually here, and later on he'll give a speech of how he's going to make blind people see. And people think once those ideas come in, it's crazy. And the chief scientist's role is to try to look at all those ideas, and some of them really are crazy and are impossible, but some of them, from a dream or from a hope, can become a reality, and they can actually change the world and change the way we live today. And the role of the chief scientist is to try to see which of those individuals and which of those companies can actually excel, and what is the amount of money that is needed to invest in those companies for that to happen. So the ecosystem comes through the chief scientist, but as I said before, it also comes a lot through the IDF. Since Israel has to invent its security again and again and again and again and again every single day, and it's not just through cyber, it's through any technology. And today there's so many young people who finish their high schools that come to the military, and the military trains them, and from the knowledge they get and from the training that they get, they invent remarkable technologies and remarkable things that later, or some of it, goes to the private sector. And when the more and more time goes by, all of those technologies will be transferred to the private sector, and the added value that they will give society is unimaginable. I visit frequently, whether it's the chief scientist or the IDF, and the things that in Israel, things that are able to do today, that the technology is enabling us to do today, is spectacular. It's beyond imagination, and I think that the contribution of that to the world society in the years to come will be something unimaginable.
But other than in terms of, well, let's say technical development, do you think that the ecosystem in Israel has created sustainable value? Is it sustainable business, or is it possibly a bit too exit-driven?
So Israel mentioned before, a lot of the R&D is done today in Israel because it has the right ecosystem. We have, I think, more engineers per 10,000 people than any other country in the world. We have the highest technological institution in Israel, and we also have engineers that are learning outside Israel, like in places in the United States or in Europe, and coming back to Israel. So educationally wise, we are pushing very, very, very hard that people go and study science and engineering and move to that sector, because we really see the added value. And from that point of view, I think it's sustainable from the government side. So you can see a lot of R&D being made in Israel, but you don't see a lot of the development later on, and the factories themselves and the producing itself done in Israel. So when it comes to massive production, it's usually taken out of Israel, and then a lot of the exits are done also outside of Israel. And what government has tried to do is to try to see how we take the R&D and the production and make sure that both stays in Israel, and then that the IP is actually being registered in Israel and done in Israel, and the massive production is also done there. So not always we can do it, because, as you know, in the Far East, places like China and India, it's always cheaper to produce. But we are trying to find ways, and we have changed our tax policy. And we came in with new reforms, taxation reforms, in order to push companies to not just to do their R&D in Israel and just to take their innovations, ideas in Israel, but also to keep their production and to stay and work in Israel. And it works 50-50. And even when you look at the exits, such as Mobileye when it made it exit, and other companies when it made it exit, in most of the cases, the companies stay in Israel. The management stays in Israel. So, for instance, take Mobileye. When Intel purchased Mobileye, they didn't move Mobileye outside Israel. They said the management will stay in Israel, the production will be staying in Israel, the R&D will stay in Israel, And this is the case. And actually, Mobileye is still growing and growing in Israel. And this is the case for many other companies also that has done their exits. We are trying as government to push as much as we can to develop that ecosystem that the companies will stay. There's still a lot of challenges. There's still a lot we can do because some of them do go out of Israel, and some of them go into the exit phase much earlier than we would have liked them to. But overall, I think it's sustainable, and I think that also Israel now is moving to many new fields of sub-fields of the high-tech sector. Cyber is one of them, and fintech is another. Fintech is becoming a new field in the world, which with the bitcoins and the digital coins, that nobody knows how this should work and where will that take financial services in the near future. And Israel today is pushing very, very hard to find out how do we bring an ecosystem of fintech R&D into Israel and develop the technologies that are needed for the new world and for the new financial services. And then as government, we are looking on the ways of how do we regulate that. What is needed to be legislated in order to, from the one hand, enable people to enjoy the progress of financial technological services, but on the other hand, how do we protect their privacy? How do we make sure that their financial details are not just out there and shared with everybody? I'm sure not everybody will be happy that his financials will be shared with everybody. Some will, if someone will cover the debit that they have in their account. But most people would like that knowledge to stay private. So how in a world where everything becomes digitalized and everything will becomes shared and technological, do you actually legislate and put down procedures that will not prevent it on the one hand, but on the other hand will preserve the right of privacy and the self-secureness that every individual wants to feel. And I think in all those fields, Israel is just thinking, 2-3 steps away. And I'll just conclude with one comment. It's not the government that is doing it. If everybody thinks that you bring in a government and the government does that, they're either lying to you or they have the best government in the world. And government are not good at those things. But it is the private sector, and it's the government putting down expenditure and just, showing the way in which they want the private sector to excel and pushing it into that direction. And I think once the government understands that role, that it's not the one that is creating those technologies, it's not the one that is it's not the one that is inventing them, but it's the one that is enabling them and pushing them to happen, and it's the one that trying to find in the direction which technologies to invest in and which fields to push for. This is what can make the difference. Always think of how you enable and how you push forward rather than trying to say, I'm the owner or I'm trying to create, which in government case, it's almost impossible.
If I can add one comment, to follow up on what Shai said, and it's really the one of the biggest debates is when to do the exit. And how to do the exit in order to leave production, exactly as Shai said. But there is a criticism on Israeli companies that are really going very fast and running to do the exit, and why they are doing it, and why they are not keeping it in order to have the production and eventually to have a bigger company in Israel. And the best example for that is Checkpoint. Checkpoint, who developed the first firewall, and you can say it's the first cyber, or not cyber, it's the first keeper of privacy, but it's part of the cyber industry today. But Checkpoint is a great example to both. Why? Because Checkpoint was founded by 3 guys. Gil Shved, who still owns the company, now not 100%, but he still owns it, but 2 other founders. One is Marius Nacht, and the third, I forgot his name, Shlomo Kramer. Thank you, Arnon. The 2 of them, Marius Nacht and Kramer, sold their shares, and they've done a great exit. But when you speak with other people that has made exits like them, they inject the money back to the high-tech sector. They developed, I know for a fact, Shlomo Kremer, as an entrepreneur, has already made the third exit of a third company. So the other side of the criticism has to take into consideration that this money, that the exit is injected not back to the industry, not only in order to buy Jaguars and villas and nice mansions, but inject to new products. And the fact that those entrepreneurs that has made the exit succeeded gives them the experience, put aside the resource, but give them the experience of how to run, how to manage correctly a startup. Most of the startups are not succeeding. The majority is not succeeding. Part of it is not because they don't have a good solution, it's because they're not managed correctly. So this is the other side.
Bettina, let's talk about Germany a bit. I read in the newspaper this week that Angela Merkel announced that she will, or somehow, initiate an investment of 3 billion euros over a stretch of 6 years into the artificial intelligence area in order to make Germany a leading player in that field. Is that what we're doing in Germany, or is there a bit more about public or governmental activities in order to create or strengthen an ecosystem for innovation?
First of all, I wanted to say that I'm very happy to be here and learn more about the achievements of Israel. I can assure you that in Deutsche Bundestag we follow very briefly what you're doing, and a lot of my colleagues are traveling there to see how the challenges the young state of Israel had, you mentioned them, Sandra Simovic, turned into chances and into success when it comes to this innovation and startup nation. So we follow that very briefly. Germany comes from a different, different preconditions. We have a strong traditional industry base. So if you look at the 100 top companies in the world, 3 are German and they're over 100 years old, which is good in a way. We've got a stable economy, but we need to address the challenges. But we come from sort of different preconditions, and this is why we're lacking behind in terms of having this innovation spirit. If you look at what a government can do, you mentioned the artificial intelligence strategy. To be honest, I don't know exactly what they're going to do with the money as of yet.
Is it a strategy?
Well, it is supposed to. But also let me say, I think we have very clever people here, and we've got this strong industry. And when I criticize what is happening, it's just because I think we have to prepare for the future. I think government has a prominent role to play, and there's room for improvement there. You need the 4 C's, you need clever people, you need the capital, you need the culture, and you also need a clever regulation. And it starts with clever people. And we have to start in school. We are not yet there. We have to bring entrepreneurship into schools to create the spirit and to teach young pupils competencies they need for this kind of economy you just explained to us and you just gave us an insight into. Clever people, you need good universities. We do have good universities, but we are lacking, or we are losing a bit of competition when it comes to comparing us worldwide, because in Germany you have the trend to everybody needs to go to university. So I've seen that here in Frankfurt. I've been heading a research institution on the management side, not on the research side. And when I started 10 years ago, we had this special contract with the state of Hessen to say that we take a small number of pupils, but we train them very well, very individually. And now we're going more to quantity again, and I think we have to address that so that we have, excellent people coming out of universities and to attract excellent brains to come here and do research with us. In Germany, as you know, we have the federal system, there are several institutions looking, so we do have quite a lot of money going into non-public research institutions. We have Helmholtz, we have Max Planck, Leibniz, and Fraunhofer, thank you. And part of them, they are doing basic research, and some of them are doing more applied research. I think we have good people. We have a lot of patents. to be asked for, to be granted, but Germany is basically missing a link, and the link would be to transfer what research is done into really application. And you mentioned what you're doing in military, with your military base. We've seen it we do see it in the US, where you have the Defense Advanced Research Project Agency, DARPA, and that is quite a stimulating effect, because there are a lot of research is done in these new technologies. And also, if you join army in Israel, this is what I hear. I haven't been there, but what I've learned is that, of course, initially you're trained very strictly.
You still haven't been to Israel?
No, not to the army. Not to the army. Oh, I've been there.
Still a chance.
Still a chance. Not yet too old. Okay, let's see. No, but you get strict training, but then you have to take over responsibility very early. And taking over responsibility also helps you later on to create this entrepreneurship and to be ready to take over responsibility for yourself, for your little company, for your idea, to make it a success. So we need clever people, we need the culture, and we need the capital. In Germany, we are lacking that capital because we still have traditional banking quite a bit, but that doesn't cater for innovative ideas enough. So we need much more venture capital. I'm so amazed you have 180, might be more, even more by now, venture capital funds in your country. And your country is not much bigger than my state of Hessen here. So, I mean, this is amazing. So in a way, we're missing this private capital, and we prepare in Germany for international standards when it comes to tax system, how to attract it, and also be able to attract it. You've done it in terms of mixed funding, matched funds. As I understand, there is now some initiative with the Kreditanstalt für Wiederaufbau to do that, but that's still not enough. So a lot of room there, clever people, yes, but let them do their job.
One small remark regarding education that was raised here. Just about half a year ago, I think I'm still a little bit jet lagged, so don't take me on the timeline here. There was a session in the OECD talking about future employment. Where is future employment is going to go? What kind of jobs are we going to have in the near future? And the tendency is to say is that a lot of the jobs that we know them today, as they exist today, will be irrelevant in the future because of a technological and digitalized world. And then the question is, how are we preparing the next generation for the future employment? How many lawyers do we really need? How many accountants do we really need? How many people working hand jobs in factories do we really need, where a lot of it can be replaced by machinery or either computers? And if that is the case, what do we need people to do? And I think this is part of a lot of the things that we as governments have to start thinking of. Where do we push education, to what systems? Israel talked about the Jewish mother before, and the Jewish mother wants her son either to be a doctor or a lawyer. Now, I'll leave the doctors aside because I don't want to mess with them, because health is the most important thing in life. But when we talk about...
You want to mess with me?
Yeah, I'm a lawyer as well, so you can always mess with yourself as well. So, but when you talk about lawyers or talk about university degrees, the Jewish mother wants her son to have, or her daughter have, a university degree and become a lawyer. Now, looking at the productivity figures, I will tend to say every single day that every additional lawyer in Israel not only will not increase productivity in Israel, but actually reduces productivity in Israel. That's a fact. Because when we were young, if you remember this, I don't know if this is the case in Germany, but it's definitely the case in Israel, and let's say 20 years ago, 25 years ago, and the family had an incident when they need a lawyer, whether it's criminal law, tort law, damages law, any kind, there was one lawyer you'll go to, and that lawyer will have a small office, and he takes care of everything. Today, you go to the firm. The firm has 20 different partners in every different field. Each partner has 3 or 4 associates that deal with every different partner in every different field. And those 4 associates have 5 to 6 interns. The amount of paperwork that this line of chain of command is actually producing is unbearable, because then they produce that amount of paper, and then the other side has to produce the same amount of paper and legislation in order to match it. Now, every single procedure that in the past, 25 years ago, would have taken, I don't know, 2 weeks, 1 week, now can take 5-6 months, because we are exchanging 100 paper, 100 pages, 200 pages, 500 pages of paperwork going from one side to the other. And that's lack of productivity. In the future world, computers can do all that in much, much faster pace than people are doing. And then the question is first of all, do we really need that much of bureaucracy? Where does the limit go between protecting and looking for every single incident and covering every single incident to actually having the thing done, progressing, moving forward, concluding the deal or concluding the subject that matter? Where does the limit go? And if computers and technology is going to take care of that, what are humans going to do? And I think this is one of the major things that today the government are looking into see. And I will tend to argue every single day that giving a child today in Israel 12 or 18 months of technological training, whether it's basic engineering or basic programming, will benefit himself and work employment and productivity in Israel much more than graduating with summa cum laude from Harvard University in law and coming back to Israel. That has zero impact, if not negative impact, on productivity. The same thing goes to accountant and many other job profiles that we have today. But giving them the technological skills and the technical skills for the future work, and just for last sentence to conclude it, if you look in a factory, in the past, people had to do it with their own hand. They needed to fix things with their own hand. Today, machinery does that. But someone needs to program those machines, and someone needs to see when the machine gets broken how to fix it. So I would tend, instead of training them to work with their hands, give them the technical skills of how to operate the machines. That in the future will become much more handy and much more productive than the skills they have today. And this goes to so many fields. And I think that everybody, it's not just Israel on agenda. It's on the world agenda today to think about world employment, future world employment, and how do we prepare our children for the world in 20, 30 years' time, and whether the education system as we know it is suitable, that's a question.
I forgot to say I'm a lawyer as well. Well,
I'm not.
Bettina,
Yeah.
You mentioned commercialization of academic R&D. I believe that's one area we can definitely learn from Israel. There's no academic institution in Israel without a commercialization unit. But what else can we learn?
We can learn a lot about the chutzpah, am I pronouncing it correctly? About the spirit, that failure is not the end of the world, that you have to get up again and start all over again. We can learn from having, you know, when I went to Hong Kong a few weeks ago and had a fintech meeting there in the evening, and the first startup person I met, a young founder, he was speaking German. And I said, why are you coming here? And he said, I came specifically to set up my business here because we have an ecosystem. First of all, I get talents in and out of the country. Germany has to be much open for having clever people coming easily to Germany and support what we are doing. We have to learn to be that agile, to be that open, to have a more diverse system here. So in these terms, we can learn a lot of being more diverse and the transfer from, you know, research into the industry. As I said initially, our companies have a strong base and they're still lacking maybe sometimes the appetite. We're still relying on what we've done in the 20th century. So if you have a horse carriage and you tie every little rope there, you have a wonderful horse carriage, but you don't have the first automotive. So we need more disruptive innovation, and therefore we need special, also the government has a certain role to play there. There is now the idea of having an agency for disruptive innovation, and I think that's very important to have that freedom to support that researchers and industry can develop the needs for the future. So I think we can learn a lot from you there. But I would also like to catch up on the topic of education, because a few weeks ago I had to sit down with my father, who turned 90 this year, and when he was born in 1928, there was a horse carriage driver. He's very famous in Germany. He drove from Berlin to Paris to protest against taxis, automotives. So my father was born that year. And this year I sat down with him and did his tax. He had to do his taxes digitally. So you see what happened within the lifespan of one person. And so I think it's so important that we invest heavily in this topic, prepare people with the right competencies for the futures, not only with knowledge, because knowledge now we've got a lot of access to knowledge, but with the competencies to adapt to the changing world, to the disruptive things, and also lifelong learning processes to prepare for what you said, having the change in the working environment. So this is something I think where both of our countries can still do a lot in terms of improving that, preparing people in this changing world to feel themselves, prepared for this world.
Thank you very much. I think we have to conclude this panel now due to it being 2:50 already. We were scheduled until 2:45. Questions, possibly after the meeting, or maybe we have 5 more minutes. Yeah, go ahead.
A question to Martina is, I'm Israeli and I work here in Germany, and this is really almost unbelievable. Like a complete team can struggle with a problem, and they have an expert from the other department in the same company, and they won't talk to you because it's another department. Do you really think that this is something that you can change, even if a government takes decision and there's something in the mentality, in the way people behave, in the standard. And when I say, we have an expert for acoustic, they were looking at me like I fell from the sky. It's another department. And this is the question. So if you think that this is really something that can be practically done, or maybe some alternative solution to bypass it are maybe better?
I think their industry and government have to work together. It starts with creating the right culture for new things. I mean, in Germany, more than 50% of pupils leaving university want to go into the public service. I mean, this is not an entrepreneurship. So, and if you have big companies, of course, the structures are much more rigid. Looking at Silicon Valley and probably Silicon Valley, we can see that I think Sandra mentioned it also in her opening remarks, that the way business is done needs to be much more democratic, much more diverse, less bureaucratic. But this is something all have to work together. You can't do it by just doing it by law. This is something that has to happen within the companies, and I think they are learning now. They put away the ties in Germany, that's a start. The outside is already much more agile. Now it comes to having flatter hierarchies and to have a much more agile working environment.
By the way, Betunia, I wouldn't suggest you will adopt everything from Israelis.
Okay, that's the conclusion.
Thank you very much.